I overheard my mother-in-law tell her friends, "She might have married my son, but Eleanor will never truly be part of this family. Blood is thicker than marriage certificates." She didn't know our 14-year-old son Tyler was listening from the staircase. But what happened next at the family reunion silenced everyone at the table. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Winters. I'm a wife, a mother, and until recently, someone who believed that love and dedication were enough to be accepted into a family, even when those hopes were buried beneath criticism, cold shoulders, and constant reminders of my outsider status. I live in a welcoming farmhouse on the outskirts of Maple Creek, Michigan. It's the kind of close-knit community where families have lived for generations, where last names carry history, and where newcomers are still considered new even after a decade. To most people in town, I'm the elementary school art teacher, who always volunteers. Community murals, holiday pageants, helping the local historical society preserve old photographs. That's me. My life revolves around creating beauty and connection in a place where I've always felt slightly out of step. And for a long time, I convinced myself that was enough, that eventually I'd earn my place here. Do you know what's strange? You can share a last name with people and still feel like you're using a false identity. My husband Carter is the kind of man who belongs everywhere he goes. Easygoing, deeply rooted, carries his family name like it's both an honor and the most natural thing in the world. He works at the family lumber business that his grandfather started. Always has. He's good at building things, good at maintaining traditions, and even better at smoothing over tensions with a well-timed joke. When we first met during my first year teaching here, I thought his comfortable confidence would eventually extend to include me. It turns out sometimes belonging is more complicated than sharing a bed and a mortgage. And then there's Tyler, our son. He's 14 years old and already more perceptive than most adults I know. He's thoughtful, curious, the kind of teenager who watches people carefully before deciding how much of himself to reveal. He observes how his father's family interacts at gatherings. He notices how his grandmother's smile tightens when I enter a room. And he watches me, especially when I'm pretending not to be hurt by another subtle exclusion. It was supposed to be a typical Sunday afternoon. Victoria, my mother-in-law, had invited the extended family over for her famous Sunday roast, a monthly tradition that I'd come to both anticipate and dread. I spent the morning baking an apple pie from scratch, using a recipe I'd perfected over years of trying to bring something special to these gatherings. That's just what I do. I keep trying, keep offering pieces of myself, even when they're received with polite disinterest. Maybe especially then. I wasn't really part of the inner circle at these family gatherings. I rarely am. I was in the kitchen arranging dessert plates while Victoria and her sisters chatted by the window. You know that kind of conversation that flows easier when certain people aren't present? Comfortable, intimate, too uninhibited. Then I heard it. Victoria's voice cut through the casual kitchen noise. "I told Deborah," she said, referring to her friend from church. "Eleanor might have married my son, but she'll never truly be part of this family. Blood is thicker than marriage certificates." The dessert fork I was holding clattered against the china. I wasn't sure if I'd heard correctly. My chest tightened as if all the air had been squeezed out of it. I stood motionless by the counter, the pie I'd spent hours on sitting untouched beside me, as if by remaining perfectly still, I could somehow make the moment disappear. I stood there absorbing the weight of her words. The same woman who'd smiled tightly at our wedding and whispered to Carter that it wasn't too late to change his mind. The same woman who'd held Tyler when he was born and said, "At least he has the Winters nose." That woman, my husband's mother, my son's grandmother. What crushed me more wasn't the sentiment. I'd suspected it for years. It was the certainty, in her voice, the finality, as if my outsider status was an unchangeable fact rather than her choice, as if my 13 years of marriage and motherhood counted for nothing against the invisible barrier of bloodlines and birth. What I didn't know in that moment, what none of us knew, was that Tyler had come down early from playing video games with his cousins upstairs. My son was standing in the hallway just beyond the kitchen, his lanky teenage frame hidden by the door, but his sensitive heart wide open to every cruel word. I didn't cry. I didn't storm into the dining room or confront Victoria like some character in a daytime drama. I just stood there in silence because sometimes silence is all you can manage when your worst fears are confirmed, and because part of me, a tired, defeated part of me, wasn't even surprised. But Tyler felt something different. He wasn't hurt in the resigned way I was. He felt it like an injustice that demanded correction. He didn't come to me. He didn't comfort me. He waited. And what he did later that afternoon at the dining table made everyone stop mid-bite. Before that afternoon, before my son's clear voice cut through the family chatter like a beam of truth, I had already been carrying years of subtle rejection. From the outside, my marriage looked stable, even enviable. We had a beautiful home on 2 acres of land with flower gardens I'd painstakingly cultivated, and an aging golden retriever named Rusty, who greeted everyone with the same enthusiastic welcome I wished I'd received. Our neighbors waved when they drove past, and I always waved back with a genuine smile. I volunteered for school events. I hosted Tyler's birthday parties with thoughtfully crafted themes. I remembered every family birthday and anniversary on Carter's side, even when he forgot. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But behind our front door, I often felt like I was auditioning for a role I would never get, no matter how perfect my performance. Not unloved by Carter exactly, but undefended, unestablished, uncertain. Carter wasn't always blind to his mother's behavior. When we first started dating, he noticed how she would forget to set a place for me at holiday dinners, or how she introduced me as Carter's friend long after we were engaged. He used to whisper apologies in my ear and squeeze my hand under the table. He made me feel like we were a team, facing her disapproval together. But something changed after we'd been married a few years. I don't know if it was fatigue or family pressure, or just the path of least resistance. But the man who once promised, "We'll create our own family traditions," turned into someone who said things like, "That's just how Mom is, and you're taking it too personally." I gave up a promising position at an art gallery in Chicago to move to Maple Creek when we got married. That was never the plan. I had dreams of curation and perhaps eventually opening my own small gallery. But Carter's family business was here. His roots were here, and honestly, I was in love enough to believe we could create something beautiful anywhere. At first, it felt like the right choice, romantic even. But as the years passed, I felt myself becoming smaller, less like Eleanor the artist, and more like Carter's wife. A role I played with diminishing returns. Tyler was the one constant source of belonging. From the moment he could form sentences, he'd say things like, "You're the best mom in the universe, for real." And I knew he meant it. He'd watch me paint in my small studio in the back of the house, quietly observing, then asking thoughtful questions about colors and techniques. He didn't just love me, he saw me, and I clung to that recognition more than I ever admitted. Victoria's acceptance, on the other hand, remained conditional and elusive, like a mirage that disappeared whenever I got close. She'd compliment me only when others were listening. But in private moments, she'd say things like, "The Winters women have always been such traditional homemakers," or, "I suppose modern women have different priorities." Each comment carefully crafted to emphasize my otherness. I wanted to shout, "I've been here for 13 years. I'm raising your grandson. I'm loving your son." But instead, I swallowed it every time. Because confronting her didn't solve anything. It only made Carter uncomfortable, the gatherings more tense, the divide deeper. She maintained a calendar of family birthdays that somehow never included mine, though it listed distant cousins and even former in-laws. She had a collection of family recipes that she'd promised to share with me for years, always finding a reason to postpone. She organized family photo sessions, and somehow I'd end up being the one taking the picture. Over time, I stopped expecting inclusion, even stopped wanting it. What was the point of reaching for acceptance that was perpetually withdrawn? Yet I kept showing up. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every family milestone. I kept smiling, contributing, trying. I told myself I was doing it for Tyler and Carter, but part of me was still that hopeful outsider, waiting for a welcome. That never came. Carter and I rarely fought about his mother directly. Instead, her presence hovered over other disagreements: where to spend holidays, how to raise Tyler, even what to serve for dinner. Carter would say, "Mom always used to," and something in me would freeze. Still, I kept trying. I kept believing that time would soften the boundaries, that love would eventually overcome bloodlines, and every now and then, Victoria would do something that gave me hope. She'd praise a pie I'd baked. She'd mention something about Tyler's artistic talent that must come from your side. Small crumbs I gathered and treasured, but Tyler saw the whole picture, even when I tried to minimize it. Children have a way of perceiving the emotions adults think they're hiding. He noticed when Victoria interrupted me mid-sentence. He noticed when family stories were told that deliberately predated my arrival. He noticed when group texts about family events sometimes accidentally left me off. One day when he was 12, I found him looking through our wedding album, a leather-bound book that seldom left the bookshelf. "Mom," he asked, studying a photo where Victoria stood rigid beside me, "why doesn't Grandma like you?" The directness of children can take your breath away. "She likes me just fine," I said automatically. "We're just different people." He looked at me with those perceptive eyes that miss nothing. "No," he said softly. "She doesn't, and Dad doesn't see it." That conversation stuck with me more than any snub or slight ever had. Because Tyler was right. And because I never wanted him to feel caught between his mother and his grandmother. By the time that Sunday dinner happened, the one where Victoria declared I'd never truly be family, I wasn't just hurt, I was bone-tired, I wasn't angry, I was empty. And the only person in that house who still saw me clearly, who recognized the toll of 13 years of gentle rejection, was the one person I most wanted to protect from it all. It was a Sunday in late October. The maple trees outside were ablaze with color, and I remember the scent of cinnamon and roasting meat filling the house. I'd lit a seasonal candle I'd brought over, hoping to contribute something to the atmosphere, even though I knew Victoria would mention how she usually preferred unscented homes. Victoria had invited the whole Winters clan, Carter's too, brothers and their wives, a couple of elderly aunts, Carter's father Howard, who was more interested in football scores than family drama, and a handful of cousins with their children. It was a full house, the kind of gathering that once upon a time would have made me nervous in the best way, eager to connect, to belong. But now I moved through these gatherings like a well-rehearsed performance. I knew when to offer help in the kitchen, but not too much lest I appear critical of Victoria's methods. I knew which topics were safe. Local school events, yes. My own family traditions, no. I knew to compliment the food effusively, but not to reveal I'd done anything differently when preparing the same dish at home. I spent most of that afternoon helping set up, arranging flowers I'd brought from our garden into a centerpiece, and keeping an eye on the younger cousins while the men watched pre-dinner football and the real family women clustered in Victoria's kitchen. Tyler had disappeared upstairs with his cousins, likely playing video games or showing them his latest collection of something. At 14, he was in that in-between stage, not quite wanting to sit with the adults, but increasingly aware of their dynamics. That's when I overheard her in the kitchen, Victoria's declaration that I'd never truly be family. I stood frozen by the dessert table, absorbing yet another confirmation that 13 years of effort had earned me nothing more than polite tolerance. I didn't confront her. Instead, I quietly placed the dessert forks in a perfect row, each one aligned exactly with the next, a small act of control when everything else felt so uncontrollable. I finished arranging the dessert table, then slipped away to the powder room where I could breathe deeply and compose myself before facing everyone at dinner. 10 minutes later, maybe 15, I splashed cold water on my face and reapplied my lipstick. I looked at myself in the mirror, still the same Eleanor, still the outsider, still trying. The knock on the bathroom door startled me. "Mom?" Tyler's voice was soft. "Everyone's sitting down for dinner." I opened the door to find him standing there, taller than me now, his face solemn. "Are you okay?" he asked, studying my face. I smiled reflexively. "Of course, sweetie. Just freshening up." He stared at me a moment longer than usual, then said quietly, "I heard what Grandma said in the kitchen." My heart sank. I closed my eyes briefly, wishing I could shield him from this particular pain. "Tyler, it's not right," he cut in, his voice surprisingly firm. "You are family, more than anyone." I touched his cheek gently. "It's complicated, honey. Family means different things to different people." He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, determination mixed with something else. "Sometimes," he said, "people need proof to see what's right in front of them." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and headed toward the dining room. "Come on," he called over his shoulder. "Grandpa's already complaining about the food. Getting cold." I followed him, puzzled by his words but grateful for his unwavering support. Something had shifted in him. I saw it. That quiet certainty, that resolve teenagers discover when they realize the adults in their life don't always get things right. As we entered the dining room, Victoria was already directing everyone to their seats, orchestrating the seating arrangement, as she always did. Carter waved me over to the seat he'd saved beside him, far from Victoria's end of the table where the family matriarchs clustered. Tyler, instead of taking his usual place with the other teenagers, pulled out a chair directly across from Victoria. "I want to sit here tonight," he announced, not asking permission, simply stating his intention. Victoria raised an eyebrow but didn't object. She liked Tyler, considered him a true Winters despite my contribution to his DNA. The irony wasn't lost on me. I took my seat beside Carter, who squeezed my hand briefly before turning to answer a question from his brother. The familiar rhythm of these gatherings continued, serving dishes past clockwise, Victoria reminding everyone of exactly how her grandmother had insisted certain foods be prepared, Howard grumbling about the game score, the gentle current of family shorthand and inside jokes floating around me but rarely including me. I picked at my food, my appetite diminished by Victoria's words still echoing in my mind. Across the table, I noticed Tyler wasn't eating much either. Instead, he was watching the conversations, his eyes moving from person to person, particularly focusing on Victoria, who was holding court at her end of the table. "Did you all hear about Judy Meyer's daughter?" Victoria was saying. "Married that man from Seattle after knowing him just 6 months. Already talking about moving away from her family." I said to Judy, "You mark my words, she'll regret not choosing someone with local roots." Several nodding heads, a few murmurs of agreement. Carter's Aunt Margaret added, "There's something to be said for marrying into a family you already know. Keeps things simple." I felt Carter tense slightly beside me. He knew these conversations inevitably circled back to me, the non-local, the artist who'd pulled Carter from the neat future that had been mapped out for him by geography and family. "Expectations," Victoria continued. "Blood connections matter, Always have. You know where you stand with family. That's when Tyler cleared his throat. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with enough intention that several conversations paused. "Actually, Grandma," he said, his voice steady despite being the center of attention, "I wanted to tell everyone about a project I did for science class last month." Victoria blinked, clearly thrown by the non sequitur. "Well, that's lovely, dear, but perhaps after dinner would be better for school stories." Tyler shook his head slightly. "It's relevant to what you were just saying about blood and family." The table grew quieter. Even Howard looked up from his plate. "For my biology project on genetics, I decided to do something cool," Tyler continued, his voice gaining confidence. "I asked Mom and Dad if we could all do one of those DNA testing kits. You know, the ones that tell you your ancestry and connect. You with relatives?" I froze mid-bite, suddenly realizing where this might be heading. Carter looked equally surprised. We had indeed done the tests at Tyler's request, but he'd never mentioned using them for a school project. "We got the results back last week," Tyler said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "It was really interesting to see the different percentages and where our ancestors came from." Victoria smiled indulgently. "Well, you already know the Winters family history. Been in Michigan since 1881. Pure English stock before that, with a touch of Scottish. On your great-grandmother's side." Tyler nodded. "Right. That's what the family Bible says. But the DNA showed something different." He swiped on his phone screen, then looked directly at Victoria. "Dad's results showed a lot of surprises. It turns out the Winters family isn't just English and Scottish." Carter leaned forward. "Tyler, what exactly did you find?" "Dad's DNA is actually really mixed. About 30% Eastern European, specifically Polish and Hungarian. There's about 15% Italian, too. Plus some Jewish ancestry that nobody ever talked about." The table had gone completely silent now. Victoria's expression had frozen, her fork suspended mid-air. "But here's the really interesting part," Tyler continued, his eyes never leaving his grandmother's face. "When I compared Dad's DNA with Mom's, I discovered something fascinating. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I had no idea what he'd found or where this was going. Mom and Dad share a distant ancestor, Tyler said clearly. They're actually something like 6th or 7th cousins. There's a branch of Mom's family from the same part of Europe as Dad's great-great-grandmother." He turned his phone around, showing a screen with colorful graphs and percentages. "See? By blood, Mom has been part of this family for centuries longer than any of us knew. The science proves it." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face had drained of color. Howard burst out laughing, breaking the tension. "Well, I'll be damned. Eleanor's been family all along." Carter reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it tightly, a gesture that felt like both an apology and a revelation. His eyes met mine with a mixture of wonder and shame. Shame that this proof was somehow necessary. Victoria set down her fork with deliberate care. That's certainly unexpected," she managed finally. Tyler wasn't finished. "The science teacher said it's actually super common. If you go back enough generations, most people from similar geographic backgrounds are related somehow." He looked around the table. "So when you talk about blood family, you might be talking about a lot more people than you realize." He turned to me then, his expression softening. "And Mom has been here, part of this family, for 14 years. That's longer than I've been alive. So even without the DNA, she's family by any definition that matters." And just like that, he picked up his fork and took a bite of potato as if he hadn't just dismantled years of careful exclusion, as if he hadn't just used science to challenge a narrative that had shaped my place in this family for over a decade. I sat there at the table, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was something else entirely. A kind of speechless pride I hadn't felt before. Not for myself, but for my son, for his ingenuity, for his fierce defense of belonging. Around the table, reactions varied. Carter's brothers exchanged glances that held decades of unspoken knowledge about their mother's behavior. One of Carter's sisters-in-law, Rebecca, who had also married into the family, caught my eye and gave me a small, knowing smile. Howard continued chuckling, muttering, "Well, what do you know about that?" while helping himself to more roast beef. Victoria attempted to recover. "Well, these tests aren't always accurate. I read an article just last month about—" "I had the science teacher verify the methodology," Tyler interrupted politely. "It's the same technology they use in forensics and medical research. It's actually pretty reliable." One of the cousins asked to see the results, and soon Tyler's phone was being passed around the table, the dinner momentarily forgotten as everyone examined the colorful charts showing connections and percentages. Carter leaned close to my ear. "Did you know about this? That we're distantly related?" I shook my head, still processing. The results showed some overlapping regions, but I never looked closely at the connection matches. He kept my hand in his, rubbing his thumb across my knuckles in a gesture that felt both familiar and somehow new. 14 years, he murmured, almost to himself. And she's never. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. I don't remember much else about the meal itself. The conversation gradually shifted to other topics, but something had fundamentally changed. The air felt different, like a long-held breath had finally been released. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Tyler had said everything that mattered. After dinner, as people began helping clear the table, Victoria approached me by the sink, where I was rinsing plates. She stood beside me for a moment, an unusual enough occurrence that I nearly dropped a serving dish. "Eleanor," she began, her voice lower than usual. "I hope you didn't misunderstand what I said earlier, about family." I kept rinsing the plate in my hands, not trusting myself to respond. "It's just, the Winters have always been particular about tradition," she continued. It wasn't personal. I finally looked at her, this woman who had spent 13 years ensuring I knew exactly where the boundaries lay. It felt personal, Victoria, every time. She had the grace to look briefly, ashamed before her expression settled into something more complicated. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the beginning of recognition. "Tyler is quite remarkable," she said finally. "He sees things clearly." "Yes," I agreed. "He does." We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment more before she nodded once, and turned away, leaving me with the dishes and the lingering sense that something immovable had finally been nudged, even slightly, off its foundation. Later that evening, as we drove home through the darkening autumn landscape, Tyler sat in the back seat, casually scrolling through his phone as if he hadn't just reimagined our family narrative. "Tyler," Carter said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "That was quite a revelation you shared today." Tyler shrugged. It was just science. I turned in my seat to look at him. Was that really for a school project? He met my eyes, and for a moment I saw through the teenage casualness to the deliberate intention beneath. "The DNA tests were for biology class," he said. "What I decided to do with the results was for you." I reached back and squeezed his knee. "Thank you," I said softly, knowing the words were inadequate for what he'd done. He nodded, understanding. In his eyes, then returned to his phone, the conversation complete as far as he was concerned. But something had been set in motion that couldn't be reversed. For the first time in 14 years, I drove away from Victoria's house feeling not like an outsider, but like someone whose belonging had been scientifically proven, even though it should never have required proof at all. The next morning, our family home carried the strange, heavy quiet that follows revelations. Sunshine streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long stripes across the hardwood floors I'd recently refinished myself. It felt different somehow, as if the house itself was processing what had happened at Victoria's, the remnants of Tyler's evidence. The DNA test results, now printed and placed on the counter, seemed to pulse with an energy all their own. Carter moved around the kitchen with unusual deliberation, brewing coffee and occasionally glancing at the papers. He hadn't said much on the drive home beyond expressing surprise at Tyler's discovery, but I could sense him processing, reconsidering, perhaps even grieving something he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked, placing a bowl of fruit on the table, our weekend breakfast ritual continuing despite the emotional earthquake of the previous day. Carter looked up, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that caught me off guard. I kept thinking about all the Sunday dinners, all the holidays, all the times I should have noticed. I busied myself with pouring juice, unsure how to navigate this new territory where my feelings were suddenly center stage after years in the wings. "It's fine, Carter. It's been this way for so long, I'm used to it." "But that's exactly it," he said, setting down his coffee mug harder than necessary. "You shouldn't have gotten used to it. I shouldn't have let you." The silence stretched between us, not our usual comfortable quiet, but something vibrating with 13 years of unspoken hurt. Before I could respond, Tyler shuffled into the kitchen, his hair rumpled from sleep, his presence immediately shifting the emotional weather in the room. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the refrigerator with teenage single-mindedness. He pulled out the orange juice, drinking directly from the carton before catching my raised eyebrow. "Sorry," he muttered, reaching for a glass. "Tyler," Carter began, his voice carrying an unusual formality. "Your mother and I were just talking about yesterday." Tyler shrugged as he poured his juice properly. "It wasn't a big deal." "It was," I said softly. "To me, it was." He looked at me then, fully present despite the early hour. "I know." "How long have you been planning this?" Carter asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Tyler leaned against the counter, suddenly seeming older than his 14 years. "Since Grandma forgot Mom's birthday last month, but remembered Cousin Ethan's girlfriend who he's only been dating for like 5 minutes. He looked at me apologetically. "I heard you crying in your studio that night." My chest tightened. I thought I'd been so careful to keep my occasional moments of hurt private, especially from Tyler. "I wasn't crying about the birthday," I said automatically. "Mom," he replied with gentle exasperation, "you've been crying about a lot of things for a long time. You just do it where you think nobody can see." Carter flinched visibly. "Tyler, that's not—" "It's okay, Dad," Tyler interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not blaming you, but you don't see it because you grew up with it. It's like background noise you don't hear anymore." I watched my husband absorb our son's words, his face working through confusion, defensiveness, and finally, painful recognition. Carter had always been a good man, a loving husband, but he'd been shaped by the very family dynamics he couldn't fully perceive. "When did you get so wise?" I asked Tyler, trying to lighten the suddenly heavy atmosphere. He grinned briefly, returning to the teenager who still collected comic books and forgot to put his dirty socks in the hamper. "When I compared Dad's DNA with Mom's, I discovered something fascinating." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I had no idea what he'd found or where this was going. "Mom and Dad share a distant ancestor," Tyler said clearly. "They're actually something like 6th or 7th cousins. There's a branch of Mom's family from the same part of Europe as Dad's great-great-grandmother." He turned his phone around, showing a screen with colorful graphs and percentages. "See? By blood, Mom has been part of this family for centuries longer than any of us knew. The science proves it." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face had drained of color. Howard burst out laughing, breaking the tension. Well, I'll be damned. Eleanor's been family all along. Carter reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it tightly, a gesture that felt like both an apology and a revelation. His eyes met mine with a mixture of wonder and shame. Shame that this proof was somehow necessary. Victoria set down her fork with deliberate care. That's certainly unexpected, she managed finally. Tyler wasn't finished. The science teacher said it's actually super common. If you go back enough generations, most people from similar geographic backgrounds are related somehow. He looked around the table. So when you talk about blood family, you might be talking about a lot more people than you realize. He turned to me then, his expression softening. And Mom has been here, part of this family, for 14 years. That's longer than I've been alive. So even without the DNA, she's family by any definition that matters. And just like that, he picked up his fork and took a bite of potato as if he hadn't just dismantled years of careful exclusion, as if he hadn't just used science to challenge a narrative that had shaped my place in this family for over a decade. I sat there at the table, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was something else entirely, a kind of speechless pride I hadn't felt before, not for myself, but for my son, for his ingenuity, for his fierce defense of belonging. Around the table, reactions varied. Carter's brothers exchanged glances that held decades of unspoken knowledge about their mother's behavior. One of Carter's sisters-in-law, Rebecca, who had also married into the family, caught my eye and gave me a small, knowing smile. Howard continued chuckling, muttering, "Well, what do you know about that?" while helping himself to more roast beef. Victoria attempted to recover. Well, these tests aren't always accurate. I read an article just last month about... I had the science teacher verify the methodology, Tyler interrupted politely. It's the same technology they use in forensics and medical research. It's actually pretty reliable. One of the cousins asked to see the results, and soon Tyler's phone was being passed around the table, the dinner momentarily forgotten as everyone examined the colorful charts showing connections and percentages. Carter leaned close to my ear. Did you know about this? That we're distantly related? I shook my head, still processing. The results showed some overlapping regions, but I never looked closely at the connection matches. He kept my hand in his, rubbing his thumb across my knuckles in a gesture that felt both familiar and somehow new. 14 years, he murmured, almost to himself. And she's never. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. I don't remember much else about the meal itself. The conversation gradually shifted to other topics, but something had fundamentally changed. The air felt different, like a long-held breath had finally been released. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Tyler had said everything that mattered. After dinner, as people began helping clear the table, Victoria approached me by the sink, where I was rinsing plates. She stood beside me for a moment, an unusual enough occurrence that I nearly dropped a serving dish. "Eleanor," she began, her voice lower than usual. "I hope you didn't misunderstand what I said earlier, about family." I kept rinsing the plate in my hands, not trusting myself to respond. "It's just, the Winters have always been particular about tradition," she continued. It wasn't personal. I finally looked at her, this woman who had spent 13 years ensuring I knew exactly where the boundaries lay. It felt personal, Victoria, every time. She had the grace to look briefly, ashamed before her expression settled into something more complicated. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the beginning of recognition. "Tyler is quite remarkable," she said finally. "He sees things clearly." "Yes," I agreed. "He does." We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment more before she nodded once. and turned away, leaving me with the dishes and the lingering sense that something immovable had finally been nudged, even slightly, off its foundation. Later that evening, as we drove home through the darkening autumn landscape, Tyler sat in the back seat, casually scrolling through his phone as if he hadn't just reimagined our family narrative. "Tyler," Carter said, glancing in the rear view mirror. "That was quite a revelation you shared today." Tyler shrugged. "It was just science." I turned in my seat to look at him. "Was that really for a school project?" He met my eyes, and for a moment I saw through the teenage casualness to the deliberate intention beneath. "The DNA tests were for biology class," he said. "What I decided to do with the results was for you." I reached back and squeezed his knee. "Thank you," I said softly, knowing the words were inadequate for what he'd done. He nodded, understanding. In his eyes, then returned to his phone, the conversation complete as far as he was concerned. But something had been set in motion that couldn't be reversed. For the first time in 14 years, I drove away from Victoria's house feeling not like an outsider, but like someone whose belonging had been scientifically proven, even though it should never have required proof at all. The next morning, our family home carried the strange, heavy quiet that follows revelations. Sunshine streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long stripes across the hardwood floors I'd recently refinished myself. It felt different somehow, as if the house itself was processing what had happened at Victoria's, the remnants of Tyler's evidence. The DNA test results, now printed and placed on the counter, seemed to pulse with an energy all their own. Carter moved around the kitchen with unusual deliberation, brewing coffee and occasionally glancing at the papers. He hadn't said much on the drive home beyond expressing surprise at Tyler's discovery, but I could sense him processing, reconsidering, perhaps even grieving something he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked, placing a bowl of fruit on the table, our weekend breakfast ritual continuing despite the emotional earthquake of the previous day. Carter looked up, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that caught me off guard. I kept thinking about all the Sunday dinners, all the holidays, all the times I should have noticed. I busied myself with pouring juice, unsure how to navigate this new territory where my feelings were suddenly center stage after years in the wings. "It's fine, Carter. It's been this way for so long, I'm used to it." "But that's exactly it," he said, setting down his coffee mug harder than necessary. "You shouldn't have gotten used to it. I shouldn't have let you." The silence stretched between us, not our usual comfortable quiet, but something vibrating with 13 years of unspoken hurt. Before I could respond, Tyler shuffled into the kitchen, his hair rumpled from sleep, his presence immediately shifting the emotional weather in the room. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the refrigerator with teenage single-mindedness. He pulled out the orange juice, drinking directly from the carton before catching my raised eyebrow. "Sorry," he muttered, reaching for a glass. "Tyler," Carter began, his voice carrying an unusual formality. "Your mother and I were just talking about yesterday." Tyler shrugged as he poured his juice properly. "It wasn't a big deal." "It was," I said softly. "To me, it was." He looked at me then, fully present despite the early hour. "I know." "How long have you been planning this?" Carter asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Tyler leaned against the counter, suddenly seeming older than his 14 years. "Since Grandma forgot Mom's birthday last month, but remembered Cousin Ethan's girlfriend who he's only been dating for like 5 minutes. He looked at me apologetically. "I heard you crying in your studio that night." My chest tightened. I thought I'd been so careful to keep my occasional moments of hurt private, especially from Tyler. "I wasn't crying about the birthday," I said automatically. "Mom," he replied with gentle exasperation, "you've been crying about a lot of things for a long time. You just do it where you think nobody can see." Carter flinched visibly. Tyler, that's not— It's okay, Dad, Tyler interrupted, his voice calm but firm. I'm not blaming you, but you don't see it because you grew up with it. It's like background noise you don't hear anymore. I watched my husband absorb our son's words, his face working through confusion, defensiveness, and finally, painful recognition. Carter had always been a good man, a loving husband, but he'd been shaped by the very family dynamics he couldn't fully perceive. When did you get so wise? I asked Tyler, trying to lighten the suddenly heavy atmosphere. He grinned briefly, returning to the teenager who still collected comic books and forgot to put his dirty socks in the hamper. Mrs. Patel's social studies class. We did a unit on cultural anthropology. She said sometimes it takes an outsider to really see a group's dynamics. He grabbed a banana from the bowl. Plus, I've been watching a lot of documentaries about genetic inheritance. Carter and I exchanged glances, both a little bewildered by this glimpse of our son's inner thought process. The moment was interrupted by the buzz of Carter's phone. He checked it, his expression instantly tightening. "It's Mom," he said. "She wants us to come over for coffee this afternoon." "All of us?" I asked, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. Victoria rarely invited me for anything smaller than a full family gathering, where my presence could be diluted by numbers. Carter nodded, looking as confused as I felt. "She specifically said you, Eleanor, and Tyler." "Well," I said after a moment, "that's new." Tyler looked between us, a mixture of wariness and pride crossing his face. "Do we have to go?" The question hung in the air like a test. In the past, there would have been no question. Victoria's invitations were treated as commands in the Winters family. But something had shifted, and we all felt it. "Not if you don't want to," Carter said, glancing at me to confirm this new approach. I considered for a moment. Part of me wanted to decline, to protect the fragile sense of validation that Tyler's revelation had created. But another part, the part that had been seeking belonging for 13 years, was curious about what Victoria might say now that her narrative had been disrupted. "I think we should go," I said finally. "But this time, we go as a united front. No more pretending or smooth-overing." I looked directly at Carter. "No more, that's just how she is." He held my gaze, then nodded slowly. "Agreed." Tyler observed this exchange with obvious satisfaction. "Cool, but I'm bringing my evidence folder just in case." And just like that, our Sunday plans were set. Not with dread or obligation, but with a strange new sense of equality I hadn't felt before in anything involving Victoria Winters. The drive to Victoria's that afternoon felt different from every previous journey. For 13 years, I'd made this trip with a hollow feeling in my stomach, mentally preparing myself for subtle slights and the careful performance of good daughter-in-law-ship. Today, sitting beside Carter with Tyler in the back seat, I felt something unfamiliar, not confidence exactly, but perhaps its quieter cousin, self-possession. "Remember," Carter said as we turned onto his mother's street, "we're not looking for a fight, but we're not ignoring things anymore either." I reached over and squeezed his hand, grateful for this shift, however belated it might be. "I've never wanted a fight, Carter. I've only wanted acknowledgement." He nodded, pulling into his mother's driveway and turning off the engine. For a moment, none of us moved to get out of the car. Through the windshield, Victoria's immaculately maintained Victorian home loomed, a physical embodiment of the Winters family history and traditions that had always seemed simultaneously to invite and exclude me. "Ready?" Carter asked, looking at me and then at Tyler in the rearview mirror. Tyler, who had insisted on bringing a folder containing printouts of the DNA results, nodded solemnly. Operation Family Tree is a go. Despite my nerves, I smiled. Leave it to a teenager to codename a difficult family conversation. Victoria opened the door before we could knock. She must have been watching for us through the front window. Her appearance was as controlled as ever. Pearl earrings, cashmere sweater, not a silver hair out of place. But something in her expression seemed less certain than usual, her typically confident smile wavering slightly at the edges. Come in, she said, her voice overly bright. I've just made a fresh pot of coffee and there's apple cider for Tyler. We followed her into the living room, which had been prepared with obvious care. The good china teacups were out, arranged on the coffee table alongside a plate of homemade shortbread, my favorite, though I couldn't recall ever telling Victoria that. The formal setting immediately put me on alert. Victoria only used the good china when she wanted to control a situation through ritual and propriety. Sit, please, she directed, indicating the sofa where Carter and I settled while Tyler chose the armchair nearest to me. Victoria took her usual seat, the high-backed chair that had belonged to her mother, positioned so that afternoon light illuminated her while leaving her guests slightly shadowed. An uncomfortable silence settled as Victoria poured coffee, with practiced precision. I caught Tyler watching her hands, noticing how they trembled slightly, an unprecedented display of nerves from a woman who prided herself on composure. I wanted to speak with you all, Victoria began after passing out cups, about yesterday's revelation. Carter shifted beside me. Mom, if this is about questioning the validity of the DNA tests, Victoria raised a hand. It's not, Carter. Not exactly. She set down her cup and looked directly at Tyler. I've been doing some reading since yesterday about these genetic tests. They're quite fascinating, aren't they? Tyler nodded cautiously. They're pretty amazing technology. Indeed, she agreed. I stayed up quite late reading about them. Did you know that genetic science has disproven many of the concepts of pure bloodlines that people once believed in? This was so far from what I'd expected that I nearly spilled my coffee. Victoria had always spoken of the Winters lineage, as if it were royal heritage, emphasizing its purity and unbroken connection to the past. The science is pretty clear, Tyler said, warming to his favorite subject. Most population groups are way more mixed than people think, especially in America. Victoria nodded, her expression unreadable. That's what I discovered. She paused, smoothing her already perfect skirt. It seems I've been operating under some outdated assumptions. Carter and I exchanged glances. In 13 years, I had never heard Victoria admit to being wrong about anything, much less something as fundamental as her family identity. I called my cousins Meredith and James this morning, she continued. Asked about some family stories I'd always accepted. It seems there were quite a few marriages that weren't recorded in the family Bible, some relatives who were, written out of the narrative. What are you saying, Mom? Carter asked, his voice gentle but firm. Victoria looked down at her, coffee cup, then directly at me. Really at me, perhaps for the first time since we'd met. I'm saying that I've been unfair to you, Eleanor. Not just yesterday, but for quite some time. The room went still. I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel, the distant sound of a lawnmower outside, the soft inhale of Tyler's breath beside me. I didn't speak. After 13 years of pushing against a closed door, I found myself suddenly unwilling to help open it. When Carter brought you home, Victoria continued, her voice soft but steady, I was concerned. You were so different from what I'd imagined for him, from what generations of Winters women had been. Artists don't fit your family mold, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She nodded, accepting the barb. It wasn't just your career, though that was part of it. You came from a different world, traveled, educated in cities, no deep roots anywhere. The Winters have always valued permanence, tradition. Mom, Carter interjected, Eleanor gave up a career she loved to put down roots here, with me. With our family. I know, Victoria said, and to my surprise, her eyes glistened with what appeared to be genuine emotion. That's part of what I realized last night. How much she gave up, while I gave so little in return. Tyler, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, opened his folder. I brought something else to show you, Grandma. It's not just about DNA. He pulled out several papers, photographs I recognized from our home albums. He handed them to Victoria, one by one. Me teaching Tyler to paint when he was 5, me helping Carter's father after his hip surgery, me organizing the family reunion 3 summers ago, me restoring the old Winters family cradle when Carter's brother had his first child. Mom has been making our family stronger for 14 years, Tyler said simply. The DNA just proves what was already true. Victoria held the photos carefully, looking at each one with an attention I'd never seen her give to anything connected to me. When she looked up, there were definite tears in her eyes. I was wrong, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I've been wrong for a very long time. The words hung in the air between us, both enormous and somehow insufficient. 13 years of exclusion, of small cruelties and silent treatments, of being the perpetual outsider. Could they really be addressed with a simple admission of wrongness? Victoria, I said finally, I've wanted to be accepted by you for a very long time, but I need to be clear about something. Our connection isn't actually about DNA. Tyler's discovery is wonderful, but it shouldn't have taken scientific proof for you to see me as family. She flinched slightly but nodded. You're right. Carter took my hand, his grip firm and supportive. Mom, Eleanor and I have built a life together, created a family together. That should have been enough for you from the beginning. I know that now, Victoria said quietly. I don't expect forgiveness immediately, but I would like a chance to do better. She looked at me directly. To know you as my daughter, not just my son's wife. The simplicity of the statement, my daughter, sent an unexpected wave of emotion through me. For years I'd been Carter's wife, or Tyler's mother in Victoria's parlance, never acknowledged in my own direct relationship to her. Tyler, always sensitive to emotional undercurrents, spoke up. Grandma, do you still have those photo albums from when Dad was growing up? The ones in the attic? Victoria seemed surprised by the change of subject. Yes, of course. Could we look at them? All of us together? Mom's never seen most of Dad's childhood pictures. I glanced at Tyler, understanding his strategy immediately. He was offering a bridge, a way for Victoria and me to begin a new kind of relationship through shared interest in the person we both loved. Victoria's face softened. I'd like that very much. She rose with new energy. I'll go bring them. Down. There are some pictures of your father at your age, Tyler. The resemblance is striking. As she left the room, Carter squeezed my hand. You okay? He whispered. I wasn't sure how to answer. The terrain had shifted so suddenly that I felt disoriented, unable to trust this new landscape after navigating the old one for so long. I think so, I said cautiously. But this doesn't erase 13 years, Carter. I know, he acknowledged. But it's a beginning. Tyler leaned over from his chair. She seemed really sincere, he offered. I mean, for Grandma. Despite everything, I smiled at his assessment. Yes, for Grandma. When Victoria returned, her arms laden with leather-bound albums, something had shifted in her demeanor. The rigid formality had softened, replaced by an almost nervous eagerness. I thought we'd start with Carter's childhood, she said, settling beside me on the sofa. Another unprecedented gesture. There's a wonderful picture of him at his 5th birthday party with cake all over his face. As she opened the first album across our laps, creating a bridge between us, I felt a strange sense of possibility unfurling. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take time, but perhaps the beginning of something new. Something that didn't erase the past but might build differently upon it. The afternoon unfolded in stories and laughter, as Victoria revealed a side of herself I'd never been permitted to see. The young mother who had documented every milestone of her children's lives with meticulous care, who could recall the specific circumstances of photographs taken decades ago, who occasionally made fun of herself in her retelling. At one point, she paused over a photo of Carter as a teenager, standing awkwardly in a too large suit. "He wore that to meet my father for the first time," she said softly. So nervous about making a good impression. She looked up at me. "I never considered how difficult it must have been for you, coming into an established family with such expectations." The simple acknowledgement, so long in coming, felt like a key turning in a lock I'd stopped noticing I carried. "It was hardest because I really wanted your approval," I admitted, even when I pretended not to care anymore. Victoria's hand, weathered by age but still elegant, moved tentatively toward mine on the photo album. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Truly." I didn't pull away. The touch felt strange, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Beside me, Carter cleared his throat, emotion evident in his voice when he spoke. "This is all I've wanted," he said quietly, "for the two women I love most in the world to find a way toward each other." Tyler, watching this exchange with the careful attention he'd always brought to family dynamics, nodded with satisfaction. "See? Science solves everything." We all laughed then, a genuine shared moment of amusement that felt like crossing a threshold into new territory. Not perfect, not without the shadows of the past, but possible in a way it hadn't been before. As we prepared to leave later that afternoon, Victoria walked us to the door, her posture different somehow. Less the family matriarch maintaining hierarchies, and more an older woman reconnecting with people she cared about. "Eleanor," she said as Carter and Tyler headed to the car, "would you consider having lunch with me next week? Just the two of us?" She hesitated, then added, "I'd like to show you some of my grandmother's recipes, the ones I've kept in the family." The significance of the offer wasn't lost on me. Those recipes, handwritten in fading ink in a book passed through generations of Winters women, had been mentioned but never shared, a symbol of my permanent outsider status. "I'd like that," I said, meaning it despite the caution I still felt. Victoria nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Thank you for giving me another chance." She glanced toward the car where Tyler waited. "Your son is extraordinary. You've raised him with wisdom I missed somehow along the way." "He sees people clearly," I said, "both their flaws and their potential." "Just like his mother," Victoria replied softly. As I joined Carter and Tyler in the car, I felt strangely lightened, not by the resolution of all hurt, but by the possibility that had opened before us. 13 years of feeling like an outsider wouldn't disappear overnight, but the borders had begun to blur, creating space for something new to grow. "So," Carter said as he started the engine, "how did that feel?" I looked back at the house where Victoria stood in the doorway, watching us leave, not with the critical assessment I'd grown accustomed to, but with what appeared to be hope. "Like the beginning of the rest of the story," I replied. "In the ice-side backseat." Tyler smiled, saying nothing but radiating the quiet satisfaction of someone who had set something important right in his world. "My son. The peacemaker, the truth-teller, the bridge builder I hadn't known we needed." As we drove home, through the familiar streets of the town that had never fully felt like mine, I realized something was different. Not just Victoria, not just Carter's new awareness, but something in me. For 13 years, I had positioned myself as the outsider seeking admission. Today, I had stood in my own truth and asked to be seen, not accommodated. And somehow, that had made all the difference. The days following Victoria's unexpected apology unfolded with an unfamiliar rhythm in our household. There was a lightness in the air, as if some invisible pressure had finally released. I noticed it first in Carter, the way his shoulders relaxed when his phone rang and he saw it was his mother calling, the absence of that slight tension that had always accompanied family discussions. For years, he had been unconsciously bracing himself, positioned between two women he loved but who couldn't connect. Now, that invisible labor had begun to dissolve. For me, the change manifested more cautiously. I found myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Victoria's old patterns to reassert themselves. Trust, I was discovering, couldn't be reestablished with a single conversation, regardless of how genuine it had seemed. 13 years of subtle exclusion had trained me to expect disappointment. "You're overthinking it again," Carter said one evening, finding me in my studio staring at a blank canvas, brush suspended in midair. "I can practically hear the gears turning." I smiled despite myself. "Old habits die hard." He moved behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "She meant what she said, Eleanor. I know my mother. When she commits to something, she follows through." "That's what worries me," I admitted. She was equally committed to keeping me at arm's length for 13 years. Carter was quiet for a moment, his breath warm against my neck. "I keep thinking about all the Sunday dinners, all the holidays, how I didn't see what was happening." "You saw what you were raised to see," I said, leaning back into him. "The Winters family mythology." "Tyler didn't buy into it," he pointed out. He saw everything clearly. Tyler had the advantage of an outsider's perspective. Plus, he's half you, half me. He bridges worlds naturally. Carter turned me gently to face him. "You know what bothers me most? That you stopped telling me how you felt. That you just accepted it as unchangeable." The observation struck a nerve I hadn't realized was exposed. "What was I supposed to do, Carter? Complain about your mother year after year?" I shook my head. "I tried in the beginning, remember? You always defended her, said I was being too sensitive." His face fell with recognition. "I did, didn't I? It was easier to be silent than to risk the one relationship in the Winters family that actually valued me." He pulled me closer. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I thought I was protecting both of you, but I was really just avoiding discomfort." I laid my head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. We both adapted to a dysfunctional situation. The important thing is that we're not doing it anymore. Later that week, I met Victoria for lunch as promised. I chose to drive myself rather than having Carter drop me off, a small assertion of independence that felt significant. As I parked in front of the small cafe Victoria had suggested, not her usual country club, I noted with interest, I took a moment to center myself. "This is new territory," I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror. "Stay present. Stay authentic." Victoria was already seated at a corner table, looking somehow both regal and uncertain. She wore a simple blue dress rather than her usual formal attire, and her silver hair was pulled back in a more relaxed style than I'd ever seen on her. She waved when she spotted me, an eager gesture that reminded me suddenly, unexpectedly, of Tyler. "Eleanor, thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. On the table between us lay a weathered leather-bound book that I recognized immediately as the legendary Winters family recipe collection. "I'm glad to be here," I replied, surprised to find I meant it. The waitress appeared to take our orders, and to my astonishment, Victoria deferred to me. "Eleanor, what would you recommend? You know I don't eat out often, and you've always had excellent taste." The small acknowledgement, that I might know something she didn't, that my opinion held value, felt like a pebble dropping into still water, creating ripples of possibility. After we ordered, Victoria placed her hand on the recipe book. "I've been thinking about why I never shared this with you before," she said without preamble. "The truth is quite embarrassing." I waited, giving her space to continue. I always saw these recipes as a kind of proof of belonging. Each woman who married into the Winters family was eventually given access, but only after they'd proven themselves worthy. She winced at her own words. It sounds terrible saying it aloud. When would I have qualified? I asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Victoria's mouth tightened with what appeared to be regret. That's just it. I kept moving. The goalposts. First, I thought after you and Carter had been married a few years. Then it was after you had Tyler. Then it was, well, there was always some reason to wait. The honesty was refreshing, even as it confirmed what I'd long suspected, that no amount of effort on my part would have been sufficient. Why? I asked simply. Victoria looked down at her hands, elegant despite their age, the wedding ring. She still wore 13 years after Howard's death, catching the light. I think I was afraid, she admitted, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Carter was always different from his brothers, more independent, more willing to challenge traditions. When he brought you home, this vibrant, artistic woman with ideas and ambitions beyond Maple Creek, I panicked. I thought you would take him away from everything I valued. I never wanted to take Carter away from his family, I said. I just wanted to be included in it. I see that now, she nodded. The irony is that by trying to maintain what I thought was family purity, I nearly destroyed the very family bond I claimed to protect. She pushed the recipe book toward me. This belongs to you too, Eleanor. Not because of DNA or because I'm finally granting permission, but because you've been family all along. I just refuse to see it. The gesture, both the physical offering of the book and the acknowledgement behind it, touched something deep within me. I reached for the volume, running my fingers over its worn cover, feeling the weight of generations of women who had added their contributions, their innovations, their legacies. Thank you, I said simply. Then, after a moment, would you tell me about some of the women who contributed to this? Their stories? Victoria's face lit up with unexpected pleasure. I'd love to. She gently opened the book, turning to pages, marked with different handwritings. This apple pie recipe was my grandmother's, Elizabeth Winters. She was quite remarkable, actually. Managed the family lumber business during World War II when all the men were overseas. That sounds like quite a woman for her time, I observed. She was, Victoria nodded. Independent, strong-willed. Actually, she paused, looking at me with new insight. You remind me of her in many ways. The comparison, clearly meant as a genuine compliment, created a bridge between us I hadn't anticipated. For the next hour, Victoria shared stories of Winters women I'd never heard about. The quiet rebel who smuggled medicine during the Spanish flu epidemic, the one who secretly funded her daughter's college education against her husband's wishes, the widow who kept the family solvent during the Depression by starting a home-based bakery. These women were far more unconventional than family legend acknowledges, I remarked, seeing the Winters lineage through new eyes. Victoria's smile held a hint of mischief I'd never witnessed before. The official family narrative has always been selective. We remember the stability, the traditions, the continuity, but not always the innovations and disruptions that actually ensured survival. Those are the most interesting parts, I said, finding myself genuinely engaged with Victoria for, perhaps the first time. I'm beginning to see that, she agreed. Tyler's revelation didn't just expose a genealogical connection. It made me question what other family stories I've misremembered or rewritten. Our lunch extended well beyond the hour we'd planned, the conversation flowing with increasing ease. Victoria shared family anecdotes Carter had never thought to tell me, while I offered insights about Tyler's developmental milestones that she had missed by keeping her distance. We were building a shared vocabulary, finding common ground in the people we both loved. As we prepared to leave, Victoria hesitated, then asked, "Would you consider helping me digitize some of the old family photographs? Howard always meant to organize them, but—" She trailed off, the grief still evident 13 years after his passing. "I'd love to," I replied, recognizing the invitation for what it was, not just a task, but a shared project, a chance to preserve history together and perhaps reframe it in the process. "Wonderful," she smiled, then added tentatively, "Perhaps we could meet weekly? I could teach you some of these recipes, and you could show me how to use that photo scanner Tyler mentioned you have." "That sounds perfect," I agreed, feeling the first fragile tendrils of a relationship beginning to form. Not the one I'd once desperately sought, but something potentially more authentic. As I drove home, the recipe book secure on the passenger seat beside me, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was cautious hope, yes, but also a lingering sadness for all the years lost to misunderstanding and pride. 13 years of family gatherings where I'd been present but not integrated. 13 years of holidays when connection had been offered conditionally, if at all. "Mom!" Tyler called as I walked through the front door. He bounded down the stairs with teenage energy that seemed at odds with the emotional maturity he'd displayed recently. "How was lunch with Grandma? Did you get the book? Did she tell you about Great-Grandma Elizabeth?" His enthusiasm made me smile. "Yes, to all of the above. How did you know about Elizabeth?" Tyler shrugged with deliberate casualness. "Grandma called me yesterday, asked me what I thought you might want to know about the family. I told her to start with the cool women nobody talks about." The revelation stopped me in my tracks. "You've been coaching your grandmother on how to connect." "With me?" He grinned. "Someone had to give her the insider intelligence. Dad's clueless about what you really care about, no offense." I laughed, simultaneously touched and amazed by my son's emotional intelligence. "Since when did you become the family therapist?" "Since I realized adults are really bad at saying what they actually mean," he replied with the perfect blend of teenage wisdom and impudence. The next few weeks brought a series of small but significant shifts in our family dynamic. Victoria began calling me directly rather than going through Carter, at first with transparent pretexts about recipes or photographs, later with genuine questions or observations. Carter watched this developing relationship with a mixture of wonder and relief, occasionally shaking his head and murmuring, "I never thought I'd see this day." 3 weeks after our initial lunch, Victoria invited us to Sunday dinner again, but this time she asked if I would help her prepare the meal. "I thought we might try your lasagna recipe," she suggested, referencing a dish I'd mentioned during one of our conversations. The one with the roasted vegetables that Tyler loves. The invitation to contribute to the sacred space of her kitchen, previously her exclusive domain, represented a seismic shift. When Sunday arrived, I found myself working alongside Victoria, our movements gradually finding a complementary rhythm as we prepared the meal together. "You know," she said as she chopped herbs with practiced precision, "I've been thinking about what Tyler said that day, about family being defined by more than blood." I nodded, continuing to layer noodles and sauce in the baking dish. It reminded me of something my mother used to say, though I'd forgotten it somehow over the years. Victoria paused, her knife still. "Family isn't who you're born to, it's who you can't live without." She looked up at me, her eyes clear and direct. I've been trying to understand why I forgot that wisdom, why I became so fixated on bloodlines and traditions. I waited, sensing she needed to work through this realization aloud. "I think," she continued slowly, "after Howard died, I became terrified of more loss. Traditions and bloodlines can't leave you. They're fixed, unchangeable. But relationships with living people, those require risk." The vulnerability in her admission caught me off guard. For 13 years, I had seen Victoria as impenetrable, rigidly certain. Now I was glimpsing the frightened woman beneath, clinging to what she could control in a world that had taken her husband without warning. Including new people means opening yourself to more potential loss, I acknowledged softly. She nodded, resuming her chopping with less confidence than before. It was easier to keep you at a distance than to risk caring about one more person who might disappear. I'm not going anywhere, Victoria, I said simply. She looked up, her eyes unexpectedly bright with unshed tears. I believe that now. The dinner that evening had a different quality from all those that had come before. Victoria had invited only us, no extended family, no audience, creating an intimate space for our reconfigured relationships to solidify. When Carter complimented the lasagna, Victoria immediately redirected the praise. This is entirely Eleanor's recipe. I merely assisted. Tyler, ever observant, caught my eye across the table and offered a subtle thumbs up. He had been watching this transformation with careful attention, neither rushing nor doubting the process. His faith in positive change, in the adults around, him finding their way to better relationships, humbled me. After dinner, as Carter and Tyler cleared the table, another departure from tradition, Victoria took me into the study, Howard's old domain that she had preserved largely untouched since his death. She hesitated briefly before opening a drawer in his desk and removing a small wooden box. I found this last week when I was looking for some old photographs, she explained, handling the box with reverence. I'd forgotten Howard had kept it. She opened the lid to reveal a collection of small, smooth stones of various colors, nestled in faded velvet. These are from the river behind our summer cottage, the one we sold after Howard got sick. Her fingers hovered over the collection. Everyone in the family chose a stone each summer to add to the jar we kept on the porch. At the end of the season, Howard would select one to keep permanently in this box. His memory stone, he called it. She selected a pale blue stone, holding it toward me. This was the summer Carter brought you to the cottage for the first time. Howard picked this one because... Her voice faltered briefly. Because he said it reminded him of how the light changed when you laughed. I accepted the stone, its surface cool and smooth against my palm, polished by years of river current before being preserved as a memory. I never knew, I said softly. Howard saw you clearly from the beginning, Victoria admitted. He told me once that you brought something the Winters family desperately needed, though he couldn't quite define what it was. She looked at me, directly. I think it was perspective. The ability to see us as we really are, not as we pretend to be. She closed the box carefully, then held it out to me. I'd like you to have this. Not because you need my permission to claim family artifacts, but because I think Howard would want you to preserve these memories. To perhaps start the tradition again, in your own way. The gift transcended the physical object. It was an acknowledgement of my place in the family's most intimate heritage, an invitation to not just receive traditions, but to reshape them. As I accepted the box, a sense of belonging washed over me, different from anything I'd sought during those 13 years of effort. It wasn't about being accepted into something fixed and unchanging, but about being recognized as someone who could help the family evolve. Thank you, I said, knowing the words were insufficient. I'd like to take these to the summer art program I'm starting for kids at the community center. We could create something beautiful with them, a mosaic, perhaps combining the Winters history with new stories. Victoria's face brightened with genuine interest. What a lovely idea. Would you mind if I helped? I used to enjoy craft projects when the boys were small, though I haven't done anything creative in years. The request, so human, so ordinary, yet so profound in what it represented, touched me deeply. I'd love that, I replied, meaning it completely. Later that evening, as Carter drove us home through the quiet streets of Maple Creek, Tyler spoke up from the back seat. So, are we like a normal family now? The question held both hope and skepticism, the teenage ability to cut straight to the heart of things. Carter caught my eye, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I don't think there's any such thing as a normal family, buddy, he replied. But are we healthier? I think we're getting there. Tyler considered this. Good, because I kind of like Grandma when she's not trying so hard to be the family gatekeeper. I turned to look at my son, this perceptive, compassionate young man who had catalyzed a transformation none of us had believed possible. You know, Tyler, what you did was brave. Standing up to someone you love when they're wrong takes real courage. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious under the praise. I just told the truth. The DNA test gave me an excuse, but I would have said something eventually anyway. Why? Carter asked, genuinely curious. Tyler was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful beyond his years. Because some things are more important than avoiding conflict, like making sure people who deserve to belong actually feel like they do. His simple wisdom silenced us both. In that moment, I realized that while I had been teaching Tyler about art and empathy and seeing beauty in unexpected places, he had been developing his own profound understanding of justice and courage. As we pulled into our driveway, the house lights welcoming us home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the changes in Victoria or the new awareness in Carter, but for the extraordinary privilege of witnessing my son become a person who would stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult, even when it challenged family mythology. Hey, Tyler said as we entered the house, can we put that memory box somewhere everyone can see it? Maybe on the mantle? Carter looked at me, deferring to my preference for this newfound family treasure. Actually, I said, I think we should open it. Look at each stone together, learn the stories, maybe add our own. Tyler's face lit up. Like rewriting the family history, but keeping the good parts? Exactly like that, I nodded. Mom would be horrified. Carter laughed, then paused. Or maybe not anymore. And that was perhaps the most profound change of all, the recognition that people could grow, that relationships could heal, that families could rewrite their stories without erasing their past. That belonging wasn't about perfect acceptance or unchanging traditions, but about creating space for everyone's truth to be acknowledged. As we gathered around the kitchen table, the box of memory stones between us, I felt something settle within me. A sense of place that had nothing to do with bloodlines or DNA tests, and everything to do with being truly seen by the people who mattered most. 6 months after Tyler's revelation at the dinner table, our family gathered at the community center for the unveiling of what had become known locally as the Belonging Project. What had started as a simple idea to use Howard's memory stones in an art program had blossomed into something far more meaningful. A community-wide exploration of what it meant to truly belong. The exhibition space buzzed with excitement. Children darted between displays while parents and grandparents moved more slowly, pausing to read stories and examine photographs. At the center of it all stood a magnificent mosaic wall, 6 feet high and 12 feet wide, composed of thousands of stones. The original Winters collection now joined by contributions from over 50 local families. I still can't believe how this grew, Carter whispered, his arm around my shoulders as we watched people interact with our creation. From a box of stones to this. I leaned into him, savoring the moment. It's what happens when you give people permission to tell their real stories. The mosaic depicted the winding river that had shaped Maple Creek's history. But unlike traditional representations that focused on landmark buildings or founding fathers, this version centered on the diverse families who had built lives along its banks. Each stone represented a memory, a piece of personal history that contributed to the larger community narrative. Victoria approached us, looking more vibrant than I'd ever seen her. At 74, she had discovered a new purpose that had transformed her from rigid family guardian to enthusiastic community historian. Eleanor, the Peterson family just arrived. They brought photographs of their grandmother's immigration documents. Her eyes shone with excitement. Did you know their family arrived the same year as the Winters but from Norway? Our families might have crossed paths on the same dock. I smiled at her enthusiasm. Maybe we should add that connection to the timeline. Exactly what I was thinking. She nodded, already turning to welcome the newcomers. Tyler materialized at my side, characteristically appearing precisely when I was thinking about him. At 15 now, he'd grown another inch and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered his own power to effect positive change. Grandma's in her element, he observed with affection. I've never seen her so excited about including people instead of keeping them out. Your grandmother is full of surprises, I agreed. Once she redirected all that energy she used to spend maintaining boundaries. She became a belonging enthusiast, Tyler finished with a grin. Carter chuckled. The town's never going to be the same. He was right. In the months since our family transformation had begun, Victoria had approached her new understanding of belonging with the same thoroughness she'd once applied to preserving family exclusivity. She had started by joining me for the children's art program, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she discovered her talent for drawing out stories from even the shyest participants. From there, she had initiated a community oral history project, reaching out to families whose Maple Creek roots were as deep as the Winters, but whose stories had never been centered in local lore. To everyone's surprise, especially her own, Victoria discovered connections between families that had been living parallel but separate lives for generations. Remember when she found out the Jacobsons and the Winters had both supplied lumber for the same church building in 1902? Carter mused. I thought she was going to pass out from excitement. Or when she realized Mrs. Diaz's great-grandmother had been the midwife who delivered your grandfather, I added. The look on her face when she understood how interconnected everyone actually was. Paradigm shift, Tyler nodded sagely, having recently discovered the term in his social studies class and applying it liberally to all significant realizations. A small commotion near the entrance drew our attention. Rebecca, Carter's sister-in-law who had married his brother James nearly 20 years ago, was arriving with her family. Unlike me, Rebecca had adapted seamlessly to Victoria's expectations, becoming the daughter-in-law Victoria had always wanted. Traditional, deferential, focused entirely on family. Our relationship had always been cordial but distant, as if we existed in separate orbits around the Winters family sun. Today, however, Rebecca made a direct line toward me, her expression determined. Eleanor, she said, taking both my hands, in hers. This is extraordinary, truly extraordinary. I thanked her, somewhat surprised by the intensity of her reaction. No, you don't understand, she continued, her voice dropping slightly. For 19 years, I've been the good daughter-in-law. I've never questioned, never rocked the boat. I thought that was the only way to belong. She glanced around the exhibition. But this, seeing all these different stories valued equally, it's given me courage I didn't know I needed. The confession caught me off guard. I had always assumed Rebecca was content with her place in the family hierarchy, that her conformity was a reflection of her natural inclinations rather than a carefully maintained performance. What kind of courage? I asked gently. She took a deep breath. I've enrolled in nursing school. Started last month. I haven't told anyone in the family yet except James. Her eyes glistened. I've wanted to be a nurse since I was a teenager, but I set it aside because it didn't fit with what Victoria thought a Winters wife should be. The revelation touched me deeply. Rebecca, that's wonderful. Truly. I couldn't have done it without seeing you stand in your truth, she said, earnestly. Watching you reclaim your art, seeing how the family expanded instead of broke. She squeezed my hands. You showed me it was possible to be authentic and still belong. As Rebecca moved on to greet other family members, I stood momentarily, stunned by the ripple effects of what had begun as Tyler's simple act of truth-telling. Carter slipped his arm around my waist. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I shook my head in wonder. Rebecca's going to nursing school, she said. She said I inspired her. Carter's eyebrows rose in surprise. Rebecca, the same Rebecca who color coordinates her family's Christmas outfits and never misses a PTA meeting? The very same, I confirmed. It seems we never really knew her. She was playing a role she thought was required for belonging. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this revelation. I wonder how many of us have been doing that in different ways, he said finally. Even me. Before I could ask what he meant, Mayor Harrington approached the center of the room, gently tapping a glass to gather everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, turning expectantly toward the small podium we had set up for the official opening. Ladies and gentlemen, families of Maple Creek, the mayor began, her voice carrying through the now hushed space. Today we celebrate not just an art installation, but a reimagining of our community's story. She gestured toward the mosaic. For generations, we've defined our town's history through a narrow lens: the founding families, the main street, businesses, the official records. But thanks to Eleanor Winters and her remarkable family, we're now seeing the true tapestry of Maple Creek. Every thread, every color, every pattern that makes us who we are. A warm round of applause filled the room. I felt a flush of pride mixed with humility. This project had grown far beyond my initial vision, becoming something that belonged to everyone. I'd like to invite Eleanor to say a few words, the E. Mayor continued, as the artist who helped us see ourselves in a new light. As I moved toward the podium, a momentary wave of nervousness washed over me. 6 months ago, I had been the perpetual outsider in the Winters family. Now I was being asked to speak for a community project that had helped dozens of families reclaim their place in local history. Looking out at the gathered faces, some familiar, some new, all attentive, I took a deep breath and found my voice. Thank you all for being here today. This project began with a simple box of river stones and a question about what it means to truly belong to a family, to a community, to a shared history. I gestured toward the mosaic. What you see before you isn't just art. It's a visual representation of what happens when we expand our definition of us. I caught Victoria's eye in the crowd. She nodded encouragingly, her expression warm with pride. Every stone in this mosaic represents a memory that shaped someone's sense of place and identity. Some are joyful, some painful, but each one matters equally to the complete picture. I paused, gathering my thoughts. For many years, I tried to belong by fitting myself into spaces that weren't designed to include me. Perhaps some of you have felt that too. The exhausting work of trying to earn acceptance by becoming less authentically yourself. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the audience. Rebecca wiped a tear from her cheek. What I've learned, what we've all discovered through this project, is that true belonging doesn't come from erasing our differences or pretending to be something we're not. It comes from creating spaces where everyone's story contributes to a larger, richer narrative. My eyes found Tyler in the crowd, his face glowing with quiet pride. Sometimes it takes the clarity and courage of youth to remind us that the boundaries we accept as fixed are actually choices we can reconsider. That the way things have always been isn't the only way they can be. I gestured to the surrounding exhibition space where family photographs, handwritten letters, recorded oral histories, and children's drawings covered the walls. Every person represented here belongs to our community story, not because they fit some predetermined criteria, but because they lived here, loved here, contributed here in their own unique way. Victoria had moved to stand beside Tyler. her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, a gesture of both pride and gratitude that would have been unimaginable a year ago. As we celebrate this project, I invite all of you to consider, where else might we expand our circles of belonging? Whose stories are we still missing? How might we create spaces where no one has to diminish themselves to be included? The applause that followed felt like a collective affirmation, a community recognizing itself in a new and more inclusive light. As people dispersed to explore the exhibition more closely, Carter approached, his expression thoughtful. "That was beautiful," he said, taking my hand. "And it made me realize something I need to tell you." "What is it?" I asked, noticing an unusual nervousness in his demeanor. He led me to a quiet corner, away from the crowd. "Remember when I said earlier that I wondered how many of us have been playing roles we thought were required? I've been doing that too." I waited, giving him space to continue. "For 15 years, I've been working at the family lumber business because it was expected, because it was the responsible thing to do." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from moments of significant decision. "But I've never loved it, Eleanor. Not the way my father did, not the way James does." This wasn't entirely a surprise. I'd sensed Carter's restlessness over the years, his lack of enthusiasm when discussing work projects, but he had never directly acknowledged it before. "What would you love?" I asked, genuinely curious about the dream he might have been holding, silently all these years. His eyes lit up with an energy I hadn't seen directed toward work in a long time. "I want to teach. History, specifically. I've been taking online courses for the past 3 years, working toward a teaching credential." Now I was truly surprised. 3 years? How did I not know this? He looked down, embarrassment crossing his features. "I didn't tell anyone. I was afraid of disappointing my family, breaking the tradition. The Winters men have run the lumber business for 4 generations." He laughed softly. "I know how ridiculous that sounds now, especially after everything we've been through this year." I squeezed his hand. "It's not ridiculous, Carter. Family expectations are powerful. They shape us in ways we don't always recognize." "But that's just it," he continued, his voice gaining conviction. "Watching you reclaim your art, seeing Tyler stand up for what's right, even witnessing my mother completely reinvent herself at 74, it's shown me it's never too late to become more authentically yourself." Joy bloomed in my chest at his revelation. "So, what's your plan?" "I've applied for student teaching positions for the fall semester. I've already talked to James about transitioning out of the business gradually." He took a deep breath. "And I need to tell my mother." As if summoned by our conversation, Victoria appeared beside us, her face flushed with excitement from conversations with exhibition visitors. "There you are! Eleanor, the Sullivan family wants to add their grandmother's quilting stories to the textile section. I told them you'd—" She stopped, noticing our serious expressions. "Is everything all right?" Carter straightened his shoulders, finding the courage that had been building over months of witnessing transformation. "Mom, I need to tell you something important. About my future." I started to step away, wanting to give them privacy for this conversation, but Carter held firm to my hand, keeping me anchored beside him. "This involves all of us. We're a family." Victoria's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "What is it, Carter?" In clear, steady terms, he explained his long-held desire to teach, his secret studies, his plans to transition away from the family business. As he spoke, I watched Victoria's face carefully, bracing for disappointment or resistance. But the Victoria of today was not the same woman who had jealously guarded family traditions 6 months ago. When Carter finished, she was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she asked simply, "Will teaching make you happy?" "Truly happy?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "In a way, the lumber business never has." Victoria nodded slowly. "Then that's what matters. She reached out, placing one hand on Carter's arm and the other on mine. If I've learned anything these past months, it's that family traditions are meant to support our growth, not confine us to paths that no longer serve. The wisdom in her words, so different from anything she might have said a year ago, brought tears to my eyes. Carter looked equally moved, the tension draining from his body as he absorbed his mother's acceptance. Dad would have supported this, Victoria continued, surprising us both. He always said you had a teacher's patience. I was the one who insisted the business had to stay in direct family hands. You're not disappointed? Carter asked, the little boy inside the grown man still seeking his mother's approval. Victoria shook her head firmly. I'm proud of you for finding your true path, even if it took longer than it should have. She glanced meaningfully at me. Some of us need a little help seeing beyond the stories we've told ourselves. Later that evening, as the exhibition wrapped up and families drifted homeward, Tyler helped me collect feedback cards visitors had filled out. He sifted through them, occasionally reading passages aloud. Listen to this one. For the first time, I saw my family's contribution to this town acknowledged. We've been here for 4 generations, but never felt like we truly belonged until now. He shuffled to another card. My grandmother would have wept to see her story included. Thank you for making space for the people history books forget. Each testimonial affirmed what we had discovered together, that belonging was not a limited resource to be guarded, but an expandable experience that grew stronger with inclusion. As we prepared to leave, Victoria approached with an envelope in her hand. Before you go, I have something for the 3 of you. She handed it to me. Consider it my contribution to our new understanding of family. Inside was a deed to a small lakeside cabin, the summer property the Winters had sold years ago during Howard's illness. I bought it back, Victoria explained, seeing our confusion. Not the main house, that was beyond my means, but the small artist's cabin on the north edge of the property, the one you always admired, Eleanor. I remembered it well, a simple structure with perfect natural light and a porch that seemed to float above the water. I had sketched it repeatedly during our only visit there, imagining it as an ideal studio space. It's not much, Victoria continued, but I thought it could be a place for our family to create new memories. A place where you could paint, Eleanor. Where Carter could plan his lessons. Where Tyler could continue being the extraordinary young man he's becoming. The gesture brought tears to my eyes, not just for the gift itself, but for what it represented. Victoria wasn't just acknowledging my place in the family. She was actively creating space for me to flourish within it. Thank you, I whispered, embracing her with genuine warmth. This means the world to us. As we drove home that evening, the car filled with a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who no longer need to perform or pretend with each other. Tyler was the first to speak. You know what's kind of amazing? He asked from the back seat. How one small truth changed everything. Carter glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Which truth are you referring to? There have been quite a few revelations this year. Tyler considered this. I guess I mean the truth that family isn't really about DNA at all. He looked out the window at the passing houses, each with its own story, its own constellation of belonging. The DNA test was just a tool to get Grandma's attention, but the real change happened when everyone started being honest about who they really are. His insight, so clear, so profound in its simplicity, reminded me yet again that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources, if only we're humble enough to listen. You're right, I acknowledged. The DNA connection gave Victoria permission to see me differently, but what's transformed our family is everyone's courage to live more authentically. Carter reached for my hand across the console. Some lessons take longer to learn than others. I'm just grateful we didn't miss our chance. As we turned onto our street, our house coming into view with warm lights glowing from within, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Not because everything was perfect. There would still be disagreements, misunderstandings, moments of reverting to old patterns, but because we had discovered something profound about belonging that would guide us through whatever came next. True belonging isn't about fitting yourself into spaces that require your diminishment. It's about creating environments where authenticity is valued more than conformity, where differences enrich rather than threaten, where everyone's story contributes to a more complete understanding of what it means to be human. The DNA test that Tyler had so cleverly deployed had proven more than a distant genetic connection. It had catalyzed a much more important recognition. That family, real family, transcends bloodlines and birth certificates. It's built choice by choice, truth by truth, moment by moment, through the courage to see each other clearly and the wisdom to make space for each person's authentic self. As I tucked away the deed to the lake cabin that night, placing it beside Howard's box of memory stones, I thought about the journey we had traveled, from exclusion to belonging, from performance to authenticity, from rigid boundaries to expansive connection. The stones that had once represented a narrow definition of family history now symbolized something far more meaningful. The understanding that our truest legacy isn't in bloodlines or traditions, but in the courage to create spaces where everyone can belong without pretending to be someone they're not. Outside our window, stars scattered across the night sky like countless points of light, separate, distinct, yet part of the same magnificent whole. So much like us, I thought. So much like all of us, finding our place in the vast, complex constellation of human connection. Different, unique, yet undeniably, irrevocably, belonging to each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.